Welcome to the Plain English Finance YouTube channel. I'm Andrew Craig, author of top-selling finance book How to Own the World and founder of financial education website plainenglishfinance.com. In the last few years, I've written 3 books and published 90 detailed blog articles on our website. But we thought it was about time we started sharing our output on video, primarily because so many of you have asked us to. So we tend to produce a couple of articles a month aimed at helping people to understand the world of finance and investment. And in future, we'll be recording these as videos and adding them to this channel, as well as sending them out by email, as we have done for the last many years. So if you want to make sure you're one of the first to see these videos, please do click the subscribe and bell buttons. So let's get started. In this introductory video today, I wanted to take a moment to restate some of our investing first principles, given how important they are for your ability to become wealthy, and even more importantly, as a direct result of that, for your life overall. Our stated mission as a company is to improve the financial affairs of as many people as possible, and we are deadly serious about that statement and that mission. The mission is a reaction to the fact that effective financial literacy is incredibly poor all over the world, and particularly in the UK, where far too many people hold incredibly unfortunate and limiting beliefs about financial markets and investment. There's a deep suspicion of money and financial markets amongst the general population in this country, perhaps as a legacy of the British class system. Too often money is described as the root of all evil, and people say things like cash is king or the stock market is a casino. And these are all actually incredibly unhelpful and anachronistic things to believe. I think it is time that British society in particular realise this, not least given how much better off we could all be. And importantly, this isn't something that's a bit of a shame or mildly disappointing. In our considered opinion, it is one of the biggest challenges faced by modern society, and all over the world, not just in the UK, truly. This stuff really is that important, and never more so than today, because a widespread improvement in financial literacy could be a key solution to many of the biggest problems so many people face as individuals, and by extension, the solution to many of the problems we face more broadly as a society, and which fill our newspaper headlines more than ever, including the current cost of living crisis, for example. I've said it before, but my strong belief is that widespread, effective financial literacy can be a kind of silver bullet for individuals and more broadly for society as a whole. I made this case in detail in my first book, How to Own the World, but at the individual level, every person who learns enough about financial markets to become properly financially literate and to optimize their financial affairs as a result, very significantly increases the chance that they will become wealthy, and almost no matter how much they earn, over long periods of time at least. So this is obviously fantastic for the individual concerned, but this reality then has 2 powerful knock-on effects for society more broadly. First, every person who does this is going to need far less state support for them and for their dependents. And this is great for government finances, which are horribly challenged all over the world. And secondly, when people become investors, they're helping to provide capital for companies which are looking to solve real human problems and or deliver human wants and needs. I've spent much of the last 7 years raising money for small, innovative British biotech companies, for example. And this is actually an incredibly hard thing to do, in the main because there is far too little capital available to support those kinds of companies, because far too few people are investing. There are amazing businesses out there that could be curing cancer, working to treat autism, obesity, diabetes, and stripping billions of cost out of the NHS. But because so few of us invest, too many of those companies struggle to raise the money they need to make progress scientifically and commercially. A depressingly small number of British people know anything at all about financial markets or make use of them in an effective way. In the UK, for example, fewer than 5% of the adult population have a stocks and shares individual savings account, one of the main tax-free investment accounts that a private individual in the UK might use to secure exposure to the stock market. So that's to say that something like 95% of the adult population are not knowingly or proactively investing in shares, something we'll look at more detail in a future video. And crucially, this makes their lives immeasurably harder than they might otherwise be. And as I've said, it is also a massive challenge to our national balance sheet and to companies who need capital to do any number of fantastic things, and not just in healthcare. I am absolutely convinced that if a much larger proportion of us were to become effectively financially literate and start investing, this would have enormous second-order benefits for society as a whole, and would be a far more effective way of delivering a massive improvement in the UK than any government policy ever will be. And I believe that the same holds true all over the world, not just in the UK. So that's what I mean by a silver bullet for society as a whole, and is also why we have such a sense of mission about what we do. At the basic level, plain English finance exists because of one simple truth, and that is that actually understanding finance is the single most important factor for your financial success. The reason so many people struggle financially is very simply because they've never learned enough about money or financial markets, or in so many cases, anything at all. And to some extent, this might seem like a statement of the glaringly obvious. We would argue, however, that although we all intuitively kind of get the idea that most people don't really understand financial markets, the sheer scale and reach of this problem and what it means for millions of us and for our society as a whole is far, far worse than nearly anyone realises. Far too few of us realise that even if you're on a relatively low income, if you understand financial markets and take a series of actually reasonably simple steps, you can realistically expect to become a millionaire, over a long period of time at least. Sadly, many people are all too cynical about this idea, but it is true nevertheless. I provided plenty of evidence for this argument in my first book, but I'm by no means the only person making this case. As long ago as 1996, US investment writers Thomas Stanley and William Danko showed that becoming wealthy is absolutely within reach for most normal people in their best-selling book, The Millionaire Next Door. And they also showed that most millionaires are actually just normal folk who've made the most of investment throughout their lives. Perhaps even more instructive here is the fact that people on huge incomes who never learn about finance can and do so often end up bankrupt. Famous examples of this include people like Boris Becker, George Best and his son Callum, numerous pop stars including Kerry Katona, Shane Fillon of Westlife, and Lee Ryan, and indeed all of the rest of Blue. Also businesswoman Karen Millen and TV presenter Michael Barrymore. The list of such examples is very long indeed. It's estimated that as many as 40% of professional footballers in the UK go bankrupt within 5 years of retirement. And the same is true in the US, where a large percentage of NFL and NBA players suffer the same fate, even though all of these people were earning 6 or even 7 figures a year for many years of their lives. Another amazing related stat here is the fact that as many as 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt within a few years of winning the lottery. That's according to the US National Endowment for Financial Education. So the conclusion here has to be that being wealthy is far more about knowledge and habit than it is about income. To a great extent, the richest 1% of people in the world are, quite simply, the most financially literate 1% of people in the world, truly. So we created Plain English Finance with a mission to solve this problem for the other 99%. Far too many people think that stock market investment and financial markets are for rich people and not for them. And we believe that this stance gets correlation and causality the wrong way round. Investment isn't for rich people. It's just that you're far more likely to become wealthy if you learn enough about financial markets and become an investor. There's at least 2 centuries of evidence that this is the case. And crucially, this has never been more important than it is today. Millions of people are sleepwalking into an impoverished future. The average British salary today is around £27,000. To generate that level of income when you retire, you will need to have saved at least £500,000. Estimates vary, but the average British person today actually has about 1/10 of that in their pension pot at around £50,000. And that's enough to buy a tiny income at retirement. At the same time, the government is incredibly unlikely to be able to afford to pay most of us a livable income in retirement. To explain why this is, the UK state pension was introduced in 1909 for over 70s when hardly anyone lived past the age of 50. In fact, average life expectancy at the time was 47 years old. It was very easy to fund the pension requirements of a tiny minority of people who survived past the age of 70 back in 1909. Most people born today are likely to live to 90 or even 100 and beyond. So you're going to need to fund 40 years or more after you stop working. And as a result, unless you're already very near retirement, you're entirely unlikely to get anything like enough to live on from the government to cover a possible 4 decades of retirement, because they simply can't afford it. It won't matter whether Labour or the Conservatives are in power. The simple fact is that Britain and many other countries can't afford to pay a living wage to the number of people who want to stop working in the next few decades. This reality is a big part of why I describe this as one of the biggest challenges faced by modern society. And this is all pretty scary stuff and really very depressing. Happily, however, all is not lost. The good news is that we can do something about this if we're willing to learn a little about investment and financial markets. Even someone on a relatively modest income can aspire to saving a big 6-figure or even 7-figure amount by the time they want to retire, if they learn a little about finance. And the main reason for this is because of the power of compound interest. In my first book, I showed how £5,000 and only £5,000 invested on the day a child is born could turn into around £1 million by the time they could first take their pension at the age of 55 with no further investment. As I said in the book, if a grandparent or wealthy relative were to invest £5,000 the day a child is born, and if that investment were to achieve 10% per annum until the child retires, with no further investment at all, that initial sum would have grown to around £1 million by the time the child turned 55. Of course, a 10% return may seem ridiculous to many people, until you consider that in the century from January 1923 to the end of 2022, the S&P index of American shares returned 10.34% per annum on average. That is 7.25% a year adjusted for inflation. Similarly, in the UK market closer to home, in the 66 years from 1955 to the end of 2021, the Numis NSCI 1000 index of the smallest companies in the UK stock market returned an average of no less than 16.3% per annum, which is 11.3% after inflation. And it's perhaps worth pointing out that this is around 4 times the real return of UK house prices over the same time frame. Those sorts of investment returns are enough to make millionaires of normal people over a lifetime of considered investment. There is a great deal more to it, of course, particularly the importance of the volatility of those returns, something we will look at in a future video. But the broad point is that stock market investment over a very long period of time can deliver outcomes that most people still have no idea are even possible. And for society more broadly, if enough people become investors, there's a much higher chance that we can create the wealth we need to fund so many of us in retirement. So that's all for today. I hope you found this video vaguely useful. If you did, please do hit the subscribe and bell buttons to make sure you get our videos in future, where we're going to go into more detail on all these sorts of topics and on what you can do to optimize your financial affairs. Until then, I wish you the very best.